Thank you for joining us on the Nikki Maduro Show. I'm Nikki Maduro. Kim McAllister has the day off. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July and stayed safe. We have a great show coming up. We have Emily Hoeven with the San Francisco Chronicle's editorial board, longtime friend of the show. We're going to be talking about Prop 47 and Governor Newsom's efforts to make sure that it wasn't on the ballot or that voters were confused about it. Emily had a great article in the Chronicle about it, and we'll have the very latest. But before we do that, please, you guys, hit that subscribe button and that bell and the thumbs up to make sure you don't miss a moment of the show. All right, so let's get to it. Now, again, Gavin Newsom, let's just bring up this guy's picture because, again, I have been, and I would say, in all honesty, I am a fan, and I'm putting that word in quotes, of Governor Newsom, insofar as I sure as hell am not a fan of Ron DeSantis, right? I think Governor Newsom does support many of the things that I support. But I love Emily Hoeven's article in the Chronicle. And the headline reads, Newsom wants California to be a bastion of democracy, except where Proposition 47 is concerned. And Emily joins us now. Emily, thank you so much for coming on the Nikki Maduro Show.
Of course, Nikki, thank you for having me.
Okay, so Proposition 47, it has been kind of this issue that's been the thorn in the side of Governor Newsom. It has been the blame of many of the problems when we're talking about crime in the state of California. So correct me if I'm wrong. In a nutshell, Proposition 47 reduced the threshold of something becoming a felony. So for instance, if you stole something, it had to reach the threshold of $950. If it was above that, it became a felony. Now, Newsom loves to say that states like, for instance, Texas, have a much higher threshold. So you would have to steal a lot more things at a higher amount before it becomes a felony. Now, local district attorneys have on the November ballot a measure to reform Proposition 47. And Governor Newsom has done so many things to either confuse or remove that ballot measure from the November ballot. So kind of walk us through the steps before we get to the spoiler alert. There is only going to be one thing on the ballot before voters, but kind of walk us through what's been happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it perfectly, Nikki, that he's been doing so many things. And so basically the first iteration of what Newsom's office and the legislative leadership, Democratic legislative leaders in the legislature attempted was, so for the past year or so, they've been working on this package of retail theft and drug bills. And it's arguably the most aggressive anti-crime package that they've pursued in years, because for the past, while or so, they've been really trying to reduce penalties, get people out of jails, out of prisons, et cetera. But I think, they see the smash and grabs, they see the people on the street openly selling and using drugs, and voters are fed up. And so they put forward this package of bills. And then, in the background, there was this measure from the DAs to toughen parts of Prop 47 that was going to be on the November ballot. And, they had been talking about negotiations to potentially find a compromise measure or get the measure off the ballot and handle things through the legislature instead. But those negotiations seem to have stalled. And so what happened is Newsom and the legislative Democrats put forward this last minute, pretty sketchy maneuver that essentially was to amend their own public safety bills to go into effect immediately and then be repealed if voters approved the Prop 47 reform measure. And so what this did was it essentially gave people who wanted tougher crime laws a choice, which was, they could support the governor and the Democrats package, which was essentially guaranteed to become law and would go into effect immediately, or they could take their chances with the DA's measure, which, would go further than what they had proposed, but was also not a sure thing. Voters would have to approve it. It would cost millions of dollars to run a campaign. And so it was really a last minute sort of strong arm technique to force them to come to the negotiating table, force them to rescind their measure.
And
The
so
problem,
basically it didn't work,
yeah.
right? Because they ran out of time, basically.
Well, that's the next thing, but that didn't work because it backfired politically, because you had Republicans and some moderate Democrats who had co-authored some of these bills become super frustrated that their bills were essentially going to be repealed, because they had also supported the ballot measure, and they didn't really agree with this one or the other approach that Newsom and the top Democrats were advocating for. So that alienated people. They didn't have the necessary votes to move those amendments. And so hilariously, over the weekend, they actually removed those amendments altogether from the bill. So they're back to the normal bills that they already were at the beginning. And they instead put forward this even more desperate and even more last minute strategy, which was to put their own competing ballot measure on the November ballot to challenge the DA measure. So the way that they went about this was very interesting, because so technically the deadline to put measures on the ballot had already passed. So they had until July 3rd to get those measures on there, like the absolute drop dead, include them in the voter official voter guide from the state. And so because bills have to be in print 72 hours before they can be voted on, in order for them to pass it by July 3rd, they had to publish the legislation on Sunday night. That's what they did. And the legislation was quite shocking in that it basically put forward this alternative ballot measure that would not go quite as far as the DA's, but it would reform Prop 47, which was ironic because Newsom and Democrats had repeatedly said that they had no intention of reforming Prop 47. They didn't want to reform Prop 47. It didn't need to be reformed. But then here they were with their reforms. But because of the fact that touching Prop 47 is very controversial among Democrats, they had actually sort of sneaked a clause into the legislation that called for a special election within it, and called for that special election to be consolidated with the November 5th general election. So what that meant was that there was no practical implications of the special election. Everything would be on the same ballot. But by calling for an election, it allowed them to circumvent a 2/3 majority vote that you actually need to have an urgent measure go into effect immediately, which they had to do because they had missed the deadline to put measures on the ballot. And so by calling for an election, it allowed for it to go into effect with a simple majority. And so essentially it was an acknowledgement that Democrats were not really, lining up behind this measure with support. And what it really was a manipulation of election procedures and a manipulation of democratic procedures, which is ironic given how often Newsom and other Democrats have, painted that as a problem of only the other side. Mm-hmm. So that was put out, and there was a lot of pushback. My column was kind of calling out the fact that they were, very callously calling for a special election, even though it wasn't a special election. Having two competing measures on the ballot was only going to confuse voters and possibly lead to no Prop 47 reform at all, because voters tend to reject measures that they find complex and confusing. And then on top of all of this, Democrats were divided. There were some initial votes to advance it. There were a lot of Democrats abstaining, expressing a lot of concerns. There was also a lot of anger because Newsom had actually put into the ballot measure as well a provision called Alexandra's Law, which essentially puts fentanyl dealers on notice that they could be held accountable for murder if they sell a product knowingly to someone with fentanyl that could kill them and that person dies. And the irony of that was that Newsom did not consult the family of Alexandra, who had passed away, before doing that. And to make matters worse, that Democrats had already multiple times rejected Alexandra's Law. So it just was creating a huge firestorm. It was a massive political miscalculation. And ironically, late Tuesday night, right before the day before they were going to have to vote on this measure to make it on the state voter guide, Newsom announced, "Oh, I'm flying to DC to go support the president. And by the way, I'm also withdrawing this ballot measure from consideration." So long story short, there is only going to be one ballot measure in November to reform Prop 47. But I think the lengths to which Newsom and his ability to kind of corral Democratic legislative leaders to go along with his plans, both of which were sketchy, and both of which alienated members of his own party. it was quite a spectacle to behold.
Well, yeah, and it goes against, like you had mentioned, everything he says about democracy, just being true to the election rules and to the voters and giving voters a say. And that brings me to my next question. First off, explain, I guess your take on this, because obviously you're not the governor and you can't speak for all Democrats. What is the biggest issue they have with touching Proposition 47? Is it the money that, are they worried about how much it's going to cost if you send more people to prison, if you touch Prop 47 and more things become a felony, obviously you're going to send more people to either jail or prison, and that costs a lot of money. Is it money? Is it something else? What is the fear there of reforming, not getting rid of, but reforming Proposition 47?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's multiple aspects to it. So Prop 47 is really a legacy of former Governor Jerry Brown. He advanced the initiative in 2014. And a big reason why he put forward that initiative was because California was and still is actually under a federal court order requiring them to maintain prison capacity below a certain amount. For years, California had overcrowded prisons. It was, objectively disastrous conditions, both for inmates and the people that worked in the prisons. And so the federal judge was like, you can't do this anymore. You need to cap the population. I mean, I guess the other alternative would be you build more prisons and then,
right.
But that's kind of never a political, that doesn't go over well usually politically. And so anyway, Jerry Brown advanced this, voters supported it. And I think that, now we're at a point in time where I think with the Democratic supermajority in the legislature, there is an unwillingness to, I think, admit or acknowledge when some of the policies that members of their own parties have championed are not exactly working as intended or have had unintended consequences. Again, I think no one is advocating for prisons to be, chock full of people to the point of disaster, and we need to comply with the federal court order. But there are a lot of very rational reasons why Prop 47 had some issues, and one of the biggest ones is that it really removed an incentive for folks to go to drug court. And that was a way for people who, were convicted of selling or using illegal drugs to remove their conviction by actually going through and completing the treatment program. And now there's no incentive. And, we wonder why there are more and more people dying of overdoses and, unable to get the help that they need. There's really no incentive for them to change that behavior. So, there are things that should be changed, but I think there's a political unwillingness. I think there's also the practical reality, which is, yes, you're going to have more people in the criminal justice system. And I think that is something that a lot of Democrats oppose for various reasons. There have been obvious inequalities in how those things have happened in the past. But it's also ironic to me that they're taking that stance so aggressively when, in fact, California's prison budget is more than it has ever been, despite the fact that our prison population is the lowest it's ever been. So we're spending more on prisons than we ever have, and yet they're also unwilling to acknowledge that that's what they're doing. And, it kind of makes you wonder, what exactly are we getting out of this? Rehabilitation programs still are not effective. People are still in wait lists. People still have a very high recidivism rate. So, there's issues there with that. And then, I think so. So I think those are some of the reasons. And I just really do think that it has underscored the lack of nuance surrounding criminal justice debate that a lot of Democrats have had here. And I think the repeated missed attempts to address Prop 47 just in the past couple of months and the fragmentation of the party really underscore the lack of a cohesive viewpoint about how to go about criminal justice reform in California. Voters are clearly extremely upset about it. I think if we had a pendulum and in the past it was too harsh, I think there's somewhat of an understanding, even among a lot of Democratic folks now, that things maybe are too lenient. So where is that sweet spot? I'm not sure if either party has really put forward a good alternative, but
well, were the anti-crime bills that Governor Newsom was setting forth as kind of this alternative to the reforms led by the local district attorneys? I mean, do they address a lot of the things that are in this ballot measure that's going to be before voters, or does the reform ballot measure go way beyond it? I mean, what's the difference there? Is it a gigantic gap?
Yeah, there's some big differences. I mean, so the legislative package, it is quite aggressive compared to what Democrats have put forward in recent years. But I think, talking to district attorneys, they feel that it does not go far enough and doesn't address the issue. So, for example, and I'm not sure if they've been amending this in recent days, but there was a bill that basically would have made it easier to aggregate lower level thefts into like one larger theft that you could prosecute as a felony. But the DAs were saying, well, the provision in the bill said that you had to prove that it was happening with the same goal and the same intent and the same like methodology. And those types of things can be pretty challenging to prove in court. So, the DAs were saying, well, we don't want all these like restrictions on how we can aggregate lower level crimes. The DA's measure also does basically, it goes back to that more aggressive pushing of treatment programs. So if you are convicted of, again, a drug possession or drug use, you can expunge that conviction, but you have to complete a treatment program. Right. And I don't think the Democrats' bills go that far in terms of like basically almost forcing someone more aggressively into treatment. So yeah, there are differences, but so it's interesting.
It's more aggressive. I mean, do you think that Governor Newsom is scared of the ballot measure passing? I mean, he always says, leave it up to the voters, let the voters decide kind of thing. And, we are a super majority, a Democratic state. How optimistic or pessimistic do you think Governor Newsom is right now that it is going to be on the ballot?
Well, I mean, I think the fact that it is on the ballot and it is the only one on the ballot, and given how Californians have repeatedly said in polls how much crime is an issue for them, it's something that they're concerned about. Yeah, I think the measure has a fairly good chance of passing, and it's very striking to me to observe even how in the past couple of years voter attitudes about crime and the appropriate response to crime have changed quite drastically. And so I think there is a good possibility that it does. And I think that if it does pass, that would be to a certain extent a pretty intense repudiation of a lot of the policies that the governor and the legislature have in recent years been passing, in which they are starting now to kind of walk back or, slow down on. But yeah, I mean, I do think that there's a pervasive sense that people are allowed to do things without consequences. And there's actually these like fake signs that went up in SF this week, and they're fake. Someone was trolling them, but basically they were posted outside of retail stores and they said, steal anything you want under $950. So basically gaming the law and saying, yeah, like do whatever you want. There's no consequences. And again, a bit of an exaggeration because, you could still get a citation or get booked in jail or whatever it is. But
it's an attitude.
People are not dumb, right? I mean, they know.
Exactly. And also, Emily, it's not just the mentality of people that commit crimes. Talk about the mentality of lawmakers in a supermajority state, because I also hear this from viewers of our show that are Republican. There is no check on Democratic lawmakers because we are a supermajority. And I kind of feel sometimes it's hard to admit that you might have been wrong. It's hard to admit that these progressive liberal ideas and then laws that you've passed aren't working. And the unintended consequences, even though your heart might have been in the right place or you were hoping it turned out the right way, it didn't, because this happened or that happened. And how hard it is to be like, yeah, this isn't working. We have to go back to the drawing board, and because it might cost you politically.
It definitely will cost you politically. And I think that, at the end of the day, what's been very frustrating is that all of these ideas have not had an implementation strategy or infrastructure to really support them. So, it's one thing to say, oh, we want fewer people to go to prison or jail. That's a great idea. But then what's the alternative for them? And are those alternatives working? And I think that they have repeatedly failed to put that forth and convince voters that that is the right thing to do. I think if you had good results, people would support that. But we're not seeing that. And I think that, yeah, Democrats have increasingly become, I think they've kind of gotten in their own bubble where they're not used to being challenged. They don't need to convince people with very different views to get a budget passed, to get bills passed. And so, they've been making these faux pas, and we've seen them with a ton of different things. I mean, even last year when they originally shot down a bill to increase penalties for child traffickers, and it just seemed so wildly out of touch for the average person that it was almost as if they had gotten a wake-up call, like, oh yeah, like this is a different environment than the rest of California, and the things that we're doing in Sacramento don't always translate well to the rest of the state or to constituents. And I do think that when they are making these mistakes like that, or they are trying to skate through these policies using these maneuvers that are quite evidently sketchy, whether it's killing your own bills or trying to manipulate election procedure to get a lower vote threshold so that you can jam something through that you want to jam through. It doesn't matter if the person who's doing that is a Democrat or Republican. Voters do not like that feeling of having their choice be taken away from them. And they don't like that feeling of people manipulating a process for their own political advantage. And that should be a nonpartisan value that we can all get behind. I mean, if there's a rule in place, everyone needs to follow that rule. You shouldn't be allowed to game it to get a result that you want, especially when it comes to a ballot, right? And I think as well, it's worth noting that the bill also stated that the ballot measure that is no longer a ballot measure, it had required that to be the very first ballot measure that Californians would see, increasing the visibility of it. Also, maybe, giving it a better chance than the DA's measure. And it had specified that if both measures were to pass, if the governors got more votes, then the other one would immediately become null and void. So what you see is when you have one party in power, and again, it doesn't really matter what party it is, but it happens to be Democrats here in California, you can do what you want. You can use the procedures of democracy to advance the result that you want, even if you do so in a way that is inherently anti-democratic and undemocratic. Yeah. And
people don't like it.
And then it backfires, and it's, I'm surprised that they would not think that people would be upset about that.
Absolutely. And I think that people that read and read your editorial are kind of waking up to that. And it doesn't sit well with voters, especially at a time like this when we want to trust the people that lead our parties. And I know that it's just our state governor, but for a governor that is making himself nationally known and is taking time to kind of be a surrogate for President Biden, he doesn't need something like this following him around when so many other things follow Governor Newsom around. Emily Hoeven, San Francisco Chronicle editorial board. I've linked her article in the show notes. I always appreciate you coming on. Great job on that article. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Really appreciate it.
All right. Stay cool out there. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. All right. That again is Emily Hoeven with the San Francisco Chronicle. That's our show on Monday. Tonight, Joe Biden is being interviewed by George Stephanopoulos. This is going to be an interview that he's going to do to, I think, try to make up for the debate. And we will be talking about this on Monday. We're trying to get John Rothman. We hope to get John Rothman also to talk about it. And we're going to be watching closely to see what happens over the weekend. And I'm concerned, obviously. You guys know how I feel about it. I'm voting for who's ever at the top of the Democratic ticket. Do I think that Joe Biden should step out of the race? At this point, I don't. I don't think that one bad debate should cancel everything that you have done. I'm not just voting for the man. I'm voting for the platform. I'm voting for the people with him. I'm voting for the cabinet. I'm voting for all of it. At the same time, people do also vote for the person. So we will see how he does. Fingers crossed. Fingers freaking crossed. He does well. All right, you guys, please click that thumbs up and show your support for the show. The super chat is also live. You guys, we can't do it without your support, though. Please consider donating to the show. It's very simple. Just go to thenikkimadoroshow.com. Our Patreon link is there. You could donate whatever you can. It's one time a month. Whatever you can donate, we really do appreciate it. We appreciate our Madorables that have been there from the very beginning and not only have supported us each and every month, but have actually bumped up their donations. So we love you. We appreciate you. It goes directly to myself and to Kim McAllister. So thank you guys from the bottom of our hearts. PayPal is also another way to donate to the show. And thank you guys for the notes you send on your PayPal donations. So just go to paypal.com hit that send button, and the email is the show's email, thenikkimedoroshow@gmail.com. And then, of course, support our sponsor, Auntie Tabby's Island Flavors. Go to auntietabbies.com and use the coupon code NIKKIM, NIKKIM. And we have delicious barbecue sauces. There's the guava barbecue sauce. There's a hibiscus hot sauce. There's a pineapple hot sauce. There's Dan. He enjoys his pineapple hot sauce. Jim, enjoying that max pack. So again, go to antitabbies.com, use the coupon code NIKKIM to get 10% off each and every order. All right, we'll talk to you guys on Monday. Until then, bye-bye.
Nikki, you're all so awesome. You're sprout like a beautiful blossom. You're also the best. I really can't rest. You're all so awesome.
Wow. Okay.